Greetings everyone and welcome in this webinar. Today we will be discussing about proposed changes for medical device quality management systems and regulatory requirements. My name is Leonora Miyako, the PCB organizer of this webinar, and the guest for today is Danny Kroo, founder and principal consultant at Docusys Corporation. Please write your questions and comments in the question box in the right-hand control panel, and Danny will answer to them accordingly. Please, Danny, you may start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to this PCB webinar, which is entitled, as was mentioned before, Medical Device Quality Management System and Regulatory Requirements Proposed Changes. And the reason why I chose this topic is because in my memory, there hasn't been a time period where there have been so many proposed changes to medical device quality management system and regulatory requirements, and I've thought that this would be of interest to everyone. So here, the presentation is very high level, so there are not so many details because just to discuss these topics would take a few days. So I'd like to do a brief discussion on the proposed changes to ISO 1345, and it looks like it's going to be 1345-2016. I'd like to also talk about new developments with regards to the Medical Device Single Audit Program, a little bit about European requirements, and also about unannounced visits. A little bit about myself. My name is Danny Kroo. I'm the president of Docusys Corporation. It was established in 1994, dealing with quality management systems. In the last 15 years, I've been working a lot in medical device quality and regulatory consulting services. I help companies. I'm located in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, and I help companies with their quality and regulatory consulting requirements. I'm also a medical device lead assessor for one of the major registrars, notified bodies, and I'm qualified to do audits for 1345, CAMCAS, MDD, Medical Device Directive, In Vitro Diagnostic Directive, and also for JPAL. My objective when I'm dealing with customers is to try to provide them value added and try to establish simple and cost-effective systems, because simple systems are much easier to maintain. And because I am involved with one of the leading notified bodies and registrars, I have the advantage of knowing exactly what the requirements are and what type of questions and what are the important aspects of being audited and what the company should focus on. And because of that, my customers have been fairly successful in meeting their requirements for being compliant or conforming to the requirements. There have been lots of changes, and we'd like to discuss some of these big changes. Okay. So we have to ask the question, why were there so many changes? And the reason why is there are several reasons. One of them is stakeholders such as regulatory bodies like the FDA, Health Canada, and Visa, and also other consumers were demanding improvements in safety and effectiveness. With the explosion of the apps that we see a lot of apps that have been entering into the health area, and these can be considered also as medical devices. So how do we regulate them, and how do we make sure that they're meeting requirements and that they're safe and that they've been verified? There have also been several very incidents that have happened, including the PIP breast implant issue, whereby the company in France was using non-medical grade plastic, and as a result caused leakage in breast implants, and it was a big issue in Europe. The question is, could these incidents have been avoided? So let's start with ISO 1345. I believe it's going to be 2016. So as you may all know, ISO 1345 is an internationally recognized medical device quality management system. In almost all parts of the world, you need to have ISO 1345 to conform to the requirements. Even the FDA 21 CFR 20 is very similar to the requirements of ISO 1345. And the last change of ISO 1345 happened in 2003. So it's been many years since the standard was changed, and it was really due for a change. So there is a working group that is set up to work on this new version. It's been around for several years. And there are lots of meetings taking place, and the last one took place in London, England in August 25th to 27th, where they dealt with internal comments from working group. So what happens is there are a lot of surveys provided, and these technical groups get together to talk about what changes are required, and then they introduce drafts of the standard, and they get internal comments from their own group, and then they introduce a draft, and this is circulated to the working group members, and then after that it could be circulated to outside parties. And this process is very lengthy. It's a little bureaucratic, and there are a lot of comments to review, and there's a lot of discussions about different aspects of the changes that are going to be made. But what I'm happy to report is that we hope to have a final draft international standard to be voted on in late 2015, and hopefully the standard will be released in 2016. One of the things that is going to be a little bit different about 1345 to ISO 9001 is, as you may all know, is ISO 9001 is to go to a new high-level structure requirement, the Annex SL, and that will be follows the ISO 14001, ISO 18001, and other standards, 27001. But ISO 1345 is not going to follow that high-level structure requirement. So there may be an issue with aligning your quality system if you have both ISO 9001 and ISO 1345, which many manufacturers have. So the question is, how do you deal with this type of issue? And I think the answer right now is that most companies will stick with the ISO 1345 structure, and if they have to show traceability to requirements in ISO 9001, they would probably use some type of a traceability matrix or any type of a table to show the linkage between the requirements of 9001 and their quality manual and procedures. Also in ISO 9001, there is no requirement, the new ISO 9001, there is no requirement for a quality manual. Just a brief summary of the proposed changes. There will be more emphasis on risk management. It's within the standard, and it's going to be an expectation that the auditors, the lead auditors, will be asking more questions related to risk management. Also, there's also a greater emphasis also on product life cycle management. There have been a lot of additional definitions introduced, such as clinical evaluation, distributor, importer, risk management, and so on. some of these changes will not probably change the way you do business or the way your quality management system works. For example, if you have critical or very important suppliers, a lot of companies have supplier agreements, and so now there is going to be a requirement to have written supplier agreements. And also the control of outsourced processes will be risk-based, which makes sense, which a lot of companies already have. Clause 4212 also requires you to create and maintain a technical file for products and product families. I believe most manufacturers have had technical files. It's just now that it's specified clearly in the standard in Clause 4212. Clause 424, which deals with control of records, requires that patient records are maintained as confidential records. For management review, it's the same topics for management review, except we've added one input for the complaint handling trends in terms of that. And also for the outputs, we're looking at the changes needed to the quality system in order to address new and revised regulatory requirements. For resources, there are changes to the infrastructure. There will be more procedures required for product, and there's also been a section clause added for contamination control. Throughout product realization, or Clause 7, there are new references to software. In the design section, in Clause 7.3, we've added design transfer as Clause 738, and also added the requirement in 7.3.10 for a design and development file. I believe most companies have had that, so it's not going to be a huge difference. In purchasing, Clause 7.4, there is a movement to strengthen supplier controls and make them risk-based, which shouldn't be a big problem for most companies. Other changes are UDI labeling in Clause 7531. In Clause 821, related to feedback, it's now a formal input to the risk management process. So you get feedback, and then you have to ask the question, does this impact my risk management process? Does this impact my risk assessment? And if it does, yes. If it doesn't, then provide some reason why not. Requirement for complaint handling was clearly specified now in Clause 82121. Whereas it was always audited, now it's distinctly, specifically in the standard. The section with requirements for control non-conforming products was split into 4 subsections with new requirements for non-conforming products that were already shipped. For 8.4, Clause 8.4, for analysis of data, there were 2 new data analysis requirements for audits and service reports. Okay, so that's a brief outline of what's happening in terms of ISO 1345. What's happening, one other thing that I wanted to mention about the 1345 is that there is a meeting that is scheduled for Seattle, Washington on the week of November 16, 2015 to review the date of publication of the standard and also the transition requirements. Usually transition requirements are usually 3 years or 36 months. So at that meeting in Seattle, Washington, I believe they will be discussing these topics. So let's talk about one of the new developments and exciting developments in terms of medical devices, quality management systems, and also regulatory. It's something that was proposed by Health Canada, FDA, Anvisa, and TGA, Australian TGA, which is called the Medical Device Single Audit Program. And this was developed by a group of regulators who I mentioned before to allow recognized third-party auditors to conduct a single audit of a medical device manufacturer that will cover ISO 1345 and the respective regulatory requirements. This is a very interesting new development because it allows for harmonization, and it will benefit the organizations who are selling to multiple jurisdictions and allow them to go through one audit instead of multiple audits, and allow maybe other companies who want to sell to other organizations to be able to have one audit. And it's certainly something that looks like it's going to be very beneficial. The way it will work is the audit will be based on ISO 1345 by an approved auditing organization, and the auditing organization does not necessarily have to be the registrar that you have right now. These you have to apply for MDSAP, and there may be some registrars or certification bodies that are currently offering ISO 1345 but will not be offering MDSAP. The requirements for MDSAP will be much tougher than the current requirements for ISO 1345 for registrars and for organizations as well. So right now we know that Health Canada, the US FDA, and Visa Brazil, Australia TGA, and Japan has stated that they're interested, and we hear also rumors that other countries are very interested in this process. It will be based on a 3-year cycle, and the objective of the MDSAP is to enable the appropriate regulatory oversight of medical device manufacturers' quality management systems while minimizing regulatory burden on industry. Like we mentioned, one audit instead of multiple audits. To promote in the longer term greater alignment of regulatory approaches and technical requirements globally based on international standards and best practices. This is a very significant point because it seems like every country seems to have their own requirements or their own twist of requirements, and anything that will promote harmonization is good, and it's good for trade, and it's good for medical device manufacturers as well. To promote more efficient and flexible use of regulatory resources through work sharing and mutual acceptance among regulators while respecting the sovereignty of each authority. I believe all the regulatory agencies are having issues in terms of manpower, because there's been an explosion of new medical devices, and a lot of manufacturers are looking to expand trade and to work to offer their products in other areas and other regions of the world, and it's a struggle for the regulators to keep up and provide good service. In terms of the standardization, there will be a new standardized rating system for manufacturer audit findings. There will be a new standardized rating system for recognized auditing organizations. As I mentioned before, it will be different, and obviously it will be a little bit tougher. Think about it. If you have to audit based on, you're used to auditing based on 2 or 3 different requirements or regulatory requirements, and now you're going to be auditing based on 5 or 6 or multiple requirements, it will be difficult, more difficult. Okay. There will be special audits. These audits will be conducted by regulatory authorities. So just because you have MDSAP doesn't mean that Health Canada, FDA, or any other regulatory body cannot come and audit you. It's just they just want to ensure that their regulatory requirements are being addressed. And there could be also unannounced audits. These are audits that could happen at any time within the audit cycles. In terms of the grading of nonconformities, there will be either minor or major nonconformities. And unannounced audits may be required to close down major nonconformities. So if you have a major nonconformity, you submit your response, and then the auditing organization can send someone at any time to close down this major nonconformity. And another thing that's important to note is that the audit reports will be sent to all the regulators, even if you're not involved with, let's say, Anvisa or with Health Canada. The reports will be sent to all of the regulators. There'll be more sharing of information between all the regulators. What's the benefits of MDSAP? I think we mentioned some of them. There will hopefully be more consistency among auditing organizations. It's a little frustrating when you are involved with medical devices and you see some companies, some organizations in different areas of the world, and they don't have to meet the rigors of what you have to meet in your area of the world. And I know it's been improving, but there are some differences between the way auditors approach and provide findings in different areas of the world. Hopefully, by following the MDSAP audit model, the audits will be conducted in a consistent manner across auditing organizations. They'll be conducted logically and efficiently with attention to the interactions between processes. Auditors will be able to determine whether systemic quality management system nonconformities are present. And that's about it for the MDSAP. So what's happening with the MDSAP is that there are pilots right now ongoing, and there are, I know of at least 2 current registrars or notified bodies that are involved with pilots, and it seems like the larger manufacturers, the ones that sell all over the world, are waiting in line to be part of this MDSAP because there will be a big cost benefit in terms of time and in terms of money because these companies have huge resources allocated for the current audit process. Let's now talk about the EU medical directives. So what's going to be happening in Europe is that the EU medical device directives will soon be replaced by a new regulation. And this is supposed to be adopted and published within Q1 or Q2 2016, with implementation and transition between 2016 to 2019. And what I have to say is that this is not set in stone. There could be changes. There are going to be significant impacts on clinical biocompatibility, preclinical performance, and other technical requirements. For IVD, in vitro diagnostics, it's uncertain whether the transition period will be either 3 or 5 years, meaning that the final implementation date could be 2019 or 2021. So part of the reason why this has happened is that there was a big outrage in Europe and around the world about the PIP scandal, which I mentioned before, with the breast implants, and also with metal hip joints. And there was a outcry in terms of the safety management of medical devices. So the European Parliament was forced to act, and they issued a resolution in June 2012 which called for stricter approval rules for notified bodies, stronger requirements for preclinical and clinical evaluation, of medical devices and the mandated unannounced inspection of medical device manufacturer. And the unannounced inspections have been happening. These changes are described in the EU Commission proposed IVD and medical device regulations dated September 26, 2012, and the European Parliament's IVD and medical device amendments on October 22, 2013. And as you know, in Europe there are about 28 countries involved, and these things take time. It's a bit of a bureaucracy. So some of the changes are that the European Commission will now be able to review recommendations for CE marking prior to approval. There's going to be a scrutiny process. The European Commission's ability to create common technical specifications will be expanded to all devices. Only newly created special notified bodies will be able to issue CE certificates for high-risk devices such as implants. That's a significant change, and the expectations for these notified bodies is much higher, and that's why there won't be too many notified bodies for you to deal with high-risk devices. So you won't have the type of choice that you have as today, and you may have to change your notified body as a result. Notified bodies will be audited for compliance with competent authorities. That means when a notified body in France will be audited, it could be that the competent authority from the UK or from Germany or from other countries may be involved in that audit. It's not just the competent authority in France. And until 2013, the audits of notified bodies were performed only by the competent authority from the member state in which the notified body is located. As we mentioned before, other changes are manufacturers will be subjected to unannounced audits by notified bodies. This is happening right now, and I've had some clients who were audited but had unannounced audits, and it's a learning process for them, and they were quite surprised about how it happened. Other things is, and this is a big impact, so there is going to be some reclassification of medical devices, such as spinal implants, devices that control and monitor active implants, nanomaterial, apheresis machines, and combination products. They will be reclassified as Class 3 devices, and then they will require a design dossier review, which can take a little bit of time. One of the big changes is with in vitro diagnostics. They will now all require notified body involvement. Before it was list-based, so if your device was not on the list, you didn't have to have any notified body involvement in terms of your in vitro diagnostic devices. A unique device identification system, similar to what the FDA is putting in place, will be required for labeling, and the European Data Bank on Medical Devices, EUDAMED, will be expanded. There's also going to be changes in terms of the formatting of the Declaration of Conformity, the information in the Declaration of Conformity, and the technical files. One of the major impacts of changes is that you'll see that notified bodies are going to be challenging clinical evidence for higher risk and also for existing devices. So if you already have a CE mark, it could happen that your notified body will challenge the information that you provided to them previously. Even though you have a CE mark, they may request additional information. They may challenge you in terms of the information that you have. There's been a lot of pressure that's been applied to notified bodies and competent authorities that are charged with designating and oversight of notified bodies in member countries. And there has been a report which was published on June 17, 2014 in a document called Commission Staff Working Document. And they noted a lot of differences between the way different notified bodies and competent authorities work. And they noted a lot of weaknesses with some of the notified bodies. So not all notified bodies and competent authorities are equivalent. Some of them are tougher than others, some of them have better processes than others, and as a result, there are going to be fewer notified bodies than there were a few years ago, and the ones that remain will be more vigilant. Unannounced audits are more common, as I mentioned before, based on the recommendation on notified body audits of September 24th, 2013. And this is a big change. This applies for where the manufacturers get a CE mark based on a notified body audit. So if you have Class 1 products that are not subject to notified body audit, you will not get an unannounced audit. And it was up until now, companies that were looking to get into access to sell their products in different markets were always thinking about going to Europe before, because of the regulatory system. It seemed to be a little bit more flexible and easier to get registered, but that's not the case anymore. So what should manufacturers plan for? There is a new requirement for something called a qualified person, and the qualified person is a person that would provide release information. What companies also have to do is they have to double check to see if they've selected the right notified body, because if your notified body is approved today, it does not mean that they're going to be approved in the future. So you have to make sure that you're dealing with an approved notified body. Within companies, there will probably be a need for increased internal and external training to ensure full compliance to the more stringent requirements, including those related to material safety, such as biocompatibility and clinical data. There are going to be higher costs, increase in cost for their overall assessment and submission fees, and I've seen that even today, that quotes for CE marking are much higher than they were before. And this will be an issue for small companies. You should also prepare for longer review times for all devices, especially Class 3 devices, Class 2B implantable devices, and novel devices. Your clinical data evaluation should be reviewed again because the requirements are much tougher, and due to reclassification there may be more requirements. The technical files will have to be updated to meet the more rigorous requirements by implementation date, and it's recommended that you establish a standard operating procedure and training for how to handle unannounced notified body inspections of companies and critical suppliers. So if you have a critical supplier, they could be subject to an audit as well. I'd like to talk to you about unannounced visits, because it's something that is happening right now, and maybe it will be, some of this information will be a benefit. So one of the immediate changes that happened as a result of the PIP scandal was that within a few years of the scandal, notified bodies had to put in a process very quickly to perform unannounced audits. And this is not an easy thing, because the frequency of the audit should be at least once every 3 years. So it depends on the risk of your device, or how risky your device is. Some will be classified And obviously somebody who's in class 3 may be audited more frequent than once every 3 years. The important part is that the notified body cannot reveal when they're going to be auditing you. It's going to be unpredictable without prior notice. So that is why I mentioned before an SOP is important, so that, and training is important, so that people will be able to react and to know what to do when the notified body auditors come. When they come, they will present themselves at the premises, and you will have to provide, the company will have to provide immediate and unrestricted access. If you do have a contract with your notified body, which I believe you should, they probably will add words to your contract. So please read your contract to see what the requirements are going to be. They may also ask for access to your critical subcontractor and crucial suppliers. And you may have to have a process whereby you have to have a contract with your supplier, your subcontractor, and you have to specify that they have to provide access for notified bodies if they are manufacturing on your behalf. And this is something that leads to a little bit of conflict. One of the issues is that there are some critical subcontractors that are working for multiple companies, and they could have multiple unannounced audits during one time period. During 1 year, they could, if they're working with 10 different companies and they're considered a critical subcontractor, they could theoretically get 10 audits, which would be very onerous, which would be very difficult for them to maintain. So this is one of the issues that they have right now. And the other issue is, how do different notified bodies share information about critical subcontractors? Because there could be several different notified bodies that may be visiting this critical supplier, and this may cause a little bit of friction between the critical subcontractor and the manufacturer. So this is one of the weak points, and this is one of the difficult points of this unannounced audit process. Okay, so what happens is the auditors usually arrive in the morning without notice, and they have a very quick opening meeting where they don't even sit down for an opening meeting. They say, we'd like to go, we're here to do an unannounced audit, we like to go to manufacturing. And usually they would go to manufacturing to concentrate on the processes that happen there, spending a little bit of time in inspection and tests, making sure that the inspection and test parameters are being respected. Then they'll probably look at control of suppliers and technical files, and then they'll follow an audit trail based on what they've seen. As mentioned before, training and procedures are important so that everybody in the organization knows what to do when an unannounced visit takes place, and that you're not caught off guard. And the other aspect is to update contracts with key suppliers to include a provision for unannounced visits. So that concludes my presentation. It was very much a high-level presentation. It dealt with the proposed changes. I thank you very much for your patience. If there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer any questions. If I cannot answer them right now, you can always email the questions, and then if necessary I can get in contact with you afterwards if you provide me with your email and provide you with the answer to any questions. So thank you very much for your attention, and wish you good luck.
Thank you, Danny, for this presentation. I want to thank all attendees as well for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us. We hope you enjoyed this webinar. We have received all your questions and we will answer to your questions individually by email. Please check PCB's schedule in our website www.pcb.com or our official social media networks, since next week we will organize webinars on interesting topics. Next Monday, we are hosting a webinar on the topic Six Sigma Achieve Business Excellence through the power of Six Sigma. Thank you.